All right, you can begin.
All right, good morning, everyone, to the October Finance Committee meeting of the CPE. I'm Eric Ferris, standing in for Luke Menzer this morning to chair the committee. We'll call the meeting to order and ask Heather if she will conduct the roll call for me, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Lucas Menzer, or Chair Lucas Menzer, sorry. Mr. Eric Ferris.
Present.
Mr. Richard Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Madison Silvert.
Here.
Miss Elaine Walker.
Here.
Mr. Colby Burks. And he'll be joining us shortly. Did I get everybody? I feel like I missed somebody. No? Okay, you can begin.
Everybody. All right. We have the September 2, 2021 minutes for approval. Are there any corrections or questions regarding those minutes? Hearing none, we will declare those approved by acclamation and move into the third item on the budget, the 2022-24 biennial budget recommendation. And for this, who's going to kick that off for us? Bill?
We'll let Bill Payne kick it off, but I did want to tell the Finance Committee before Bill kicks off, we're going to be bringing to you several things today, from our agency budget to the biennial ask. We feel really good about this. We've got all the presidents and campuses on board. The item that I will tell you is that there are, it looks like we have money in the state this time. And the argument is that we need to be thinking about investing in the solution as much as we are some of the issues. You probably saw my tweet this morning where I hit it fairly hard. But we are happy to bring to you what we consider to be a solid budget that's a little bit larger than we've presented in previous years. But, you know, Bill Payne's here to tell us all about it.
Thank you, Bill. And Aaron.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted now. Thank you, President Thompson, members of the Finance Committee. Just quickly to remind everybody, here is a copy of the agenda for today's meeting. Only one major topic on the agenda, that's the biennial budget recommendation. There's going to be three major components to that request. There's the post-secondary institution request, which has three subcomponents, and we'll talk a little bit more about those here in a minute. Then the agency budget request. And then finally, we have a special appropriation request for Kentucky State University that we'll be covering today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and ask Sean if he will go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint for today's meeting. Okay, I'm trying to get my screen to be larger. Here we go. Thank you, Sean. Go ahead to the next slide, Sean. And again, in terms of the overview, this mirrors the agenda that we just covered, so I'm not going to go through this again. Continue, Sean. So our first section is the post-secondary institution budget request, and there are three subcomponents to that request. Go ahead, Sean. Performance funding, we're requesting $67.5 million in the first year, $90 million in the second year. And as President Thompson indicated, this is a little bit larger ask than we made 2 years ago. But we think it's justified given, you know, over the past 13 years, our campuses have incurred 12 budget cuts, about $222 million in nominal terms, about 21% of their state general fund support. Another subcomponent of the operating funds request is pension relief funding, about 2.2 million in the first year, 4.4 million in the second. Those would be recurring dollars. And then finally, the KSU land grant program, about 671,000 each year. But we also are going to request 671,500 as part of a current year appropriation for fiscal year 2021-22. Next slide, Sean. So let's talk just a few minutes about the features of the performance funding request. I've already indicated that it's 67.5 million in the first year, 90 million in the second year. And this program was designed to provide financial incentives for our institutions to pursue state goals for higher education. And we're making great progress in that regard. And we'll show you a little bit more about that here in just a second. It's anticipated that $17.3 million that were appropriated to the performance fund in the current year and distributed to our campuses will not become recurring to campus-based budgets. Those are going to be returned to the performance fund. And that was brought about by some change in the performance funding statute 164.092. The working group came together and worked for about 4 or 5 months. And one of the changes that they recommended to the performance funding statute was that the performance funds be recurring to the post-secondary education performance fund itself rather than becoming recurring to campus budgets. Now, what this means, if the requested funds are authorized in full, there could be 84.8 million in the first year and $107.3 million in the second year available for distribution. Lastly, it's anticipated that mandated program funding and amounts of funding for those mandated programs will continue to be line item in the budget bill. In terms of rationale for this request, I've already indicated that it provides incentives for institutions to grow their student success outcomes. But it also helps the council and campus officials to maintain affordability and access. With the budget cuts that we've had over the past 13 years with mandated pension cost increases, there's been a lot of stress on campus-based budgets. And these additional resources will alleviate some of that stress and allow the council and the institutions to minimize tuition and fee increases going forward. These funds obviously provide resources necessary to continue pursuing those state student success goals. And in my mind, this is probably the most important rationale for this request. Performance funding is working, folks. Institutions are closing achievement gaps, growing STEM plus H degrees, and they're making progress toward the state's 60 by 30 goal. And I'm going to show you just a little bit more about that in the next 3 slides. And let me just stop for 1 second and say, President Thompson, you're welcome to jump in at any time to make any comments that you would care to make. And members of the Finance Committee, please stop me at any point if you have any questions.
Just to reiterate, to put it in perspective.
Next slide, Sean.
That we've been able to really show the increase in the outcomes that goes to our strategic agenda. And this is what Bill's getting ready to show here, or I'll just talk a little bit about it. As you all know, in our performance funding model, I like to say we have a triangulated system of us trying to get the outputs that we need for Kentucky. The first is the performance funding model. The strategic agenda that really crosses all boundaries is kind of like the center of this. And then the last will be our diversity policy and how we use that as a mechanism to help our campuses really focus on those strategies that are needed. Thus, there'll be people you're going to find out are institutions that may not get as much as the others for a variety of reasons. You may have questions about that. But what we are seeing is that the performance funding incentives are having the impact that we purported that it could have, or that was really hoped for. And Kentucky has a more holistic performance funding model than any state. And so when we look at these numbers, and I won't go over in great detail, you can see them yourself, that they are having the impact that it needs to have. Now, that's not making an argument to the fact that many of the campuses that are not getting those dollars are not needing those dollars. But it is saying that this is the way that funding is distributed and determined in the state now, and it is having the impact.
Sean, back up one slide. There's one more comment I want to make about the growth in underrepresented minority degrees. Thanks to President Thompson's input on the original post-secondary education performance funding working group and the members of that original group, Kentucky's performance funding model has the highest premiums, I believe, of any performance funding model in the nation, rewarding additional production of bachelor's degrees among our underrepresented student population and degrees and credentials also at the two-year college level. And obviously that's what these charts are showing you. The chart on the left is underrepresented minority bachelor's degrees for the research sector shown by the blue bar, and the comprehensive university sector shown by the red bar. And between 2014 and 2020, there was 40% growth in the number of bachelor's degrees awarded to underrepresented minority students. And that's really unprecedented, folks. We're making great progress. Same thing, if you look at the chart on the right, those are KCTCS, underrepresented minority degrees and credentials between 2016 and 2020. Again, 40% growth. That's an average annual growth rate of close to 9%, which again, is remarkable. Next slide, Sean. We're seeing something similar in terms of growth in STEM plus H degrees and credentials. We have some relatively high premiums to reward growth in those fields in the performance funding model as well. And again, the chart on the left is showing STEM plus H bachelor's degrees produced by the research universities represented by the blue bars, and then the comprehensive universities represented by the red bars, 30% growth in total over this time period. If you look at the chart on the right, KCTCS STEM plus H degrees and credentials have grown by 29% or 3,100 awards since 2016. And what this really means is that we're making great progress toward the state's 60 by 30 attainment goal. Next slide, Sean. And that's what this chart is showing. We're exceeding the growth rate needed in terms of undergraduate degrees and credentials for Kentucky to achieve that 60 by 30 goal. The green shaded area in the chart shows that we need an average annual growth rate of about 1.7% per year to meet that goal in 2030. We've been growing by 3.5% per year on average for the past 4 years. So we're making fantastic progress. Any other comments, President Thompson?
No, thanks, Bill.
Okay.
One of the
Okay, go
things that I would question is whether or not the various universities and colleges have been able to see what actually works through the first years of this program. And I wouldn't be surprised if it actually grows as we get further along, because they're seeing the success. They're also seeing the benefit to their revenues. And it's a very exciting, I mean, kudos to the development of this program and the execution of the colleges and universities.
Elaine, great question. And the answer is yes. Like I said, we have this triangulated process. I think Travis is on here. You can ask him too. We've really been able to look at what we consider to be best practices to get these outputs, to see what is working on our individual campuses all the way down to our community college campuses, to see what's working. And if it's not working, we help them. They work with us to design items that can work versus those that can't. Now, let me give you an example on the performance funding model and how campuses are using that. many of our campuses, UK kind of led the way with this, to find out that we were losing a lot of students because of financial need while they were in college. And they figured out exactly down to the penny almost the greatest likelihood that a student would leave. And so they designed programs for that. Since then, several things have happened. One is that we have promise programs on all of our campuses now, the last dollar in for our low income. We have ways of building wraparound services for all of our students with certain GPAs coming into the on our campuses. Now, CPE helped them to do that part, because we basically when we went test optional and got rid of developmental education, we designed a process where they had to provide wraparound services with people at a certain GPA. But those are just a few examples of what people have done. So your point is simply this: did this create behavioral change that would create a dynamism of continuous improvement based on, you know, what they're getting even, or what they believe that they are wanting to get in the future? And the answer is yes.
Okay, go ahead, Sean. Moving on to the next component of the operating funds request. Staff is recommending 2.2 million in 2022-23 and 4.4 million in 2023-24 to maintain KERS pension subsidies at the 2022 levels for participating institutions. And just to give you a little bit of background information about what happened in the current year, 2021-22, we had 5 of our comprehensive universities, that excludes Northern Kentucky University, and KCTCS that were transitioned to a fixed dollar allocation method of determining employer paid pension contributions. Now, in the current year, the General Assembly in House Bill 192 appropriated $22.1 million, which was intended to cover 100% of the cost of that transition. Now, you'll notice in our agenda item at the last page, in terms of the operating funds request, we've got several of our institutions that have indicated that the estimates that were used to determine what 100% of the transition costs would be were slightly off, and they believe they received somewhat less than 100% of those transition costs. But we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. But this particular request is in response to a pension reduction of 10% per year over the next 5 years that's called for in House Bill 8. And Sean, I'm going to get you to skip 2 slides ahead, and I'm going to show the folks the reduction. So this is what's going on in the current year. In 2021-22, House Bill 192 appropriated $22.1 million, as I've said, and you can see how much each comprehensive university, with the exception of Northern and KCTCS, received in that first column. And highlighted in yellow is the KERS, pension cost coverage. It's the amount of the subsidy, so 100% in the current year. House Bill 8 over the next 5 years calls for the pension subsidy to be reduced to 90%, 80%, 70%, and so on, so that in the 5th year, you only get 50% of the subsidy that you received in the current year. And of course, UK, U of L, and now Northern do not participate in the Kentucky retirement system. Okay, go back up 1 slide, Sean. So here's the rationale for this request. Those reductions in those pension subsidies are essentially a budget cut for these institutions. It will be as high as 7.3% at Eastern, 7% at Moorhead, 4% at Murray, once we reach the end of this 5-year period. Another reason for this request, our campuses are still accumulating COVID-19 costs and foregone revenues. And there are funding gaps between the amount of funding provided by the federal government in terms of the CARES Act funding, ARP Act funding, and CARISA. And so millions and millions of dollars of cost and foregone revenues are exceeding the federal dollars that were provided to try to offset those costs. Then lastly, if authorized, these requested funds would do a number of things. It would reduce stress on campus budgets because they wouldn't experience those budget cuts. It would help the council and institutions maintain affordability and access. It would provide needed resources for those institutions to continue to pursue student success goals. And then lastly, and this is important, it eliminates a potential disadvantage for those 5 comprehensive universities in terms of the university funding model. If those institutions are receiving, budget cuts each year over the next 5 years, and UK and U of L and Northern are not, it places those 5 comprehensive universities at a disadvantage because they don't have the resources that are in their base now. They're essentially receiving that budget cut almost every year. And so they don't have the resources to pursue those student success goals. Okay, Sean, keep going. One more. The last component in the operating funds request is $671,500 each year of the upcoming biennium to meet a federal matching requirement for KSU's land grant program. In the most recent request for application that was received by KSU this past September, this was the amount of the increase in the federal grant that they received. And those federal grants must be matched dollar for dollar by the state. You'll see in that second bullet, we're also requesting a current year appropriation in 2021-22 of $671,500 as well to meet the match in the current year. If these funds are authorized, staff recommends that the funds be appropriated directly to KSU. And if the funds are authorized, KSU will have a total of $8,881,900 in state general funds supporting their land grant program. And that amount would be line itemed in the appropriations bill. And when CPE staff, runs the performance funding model each year of the upcoming biennium, that amount would be excluded from the performance funding model. Next slide, Sean. Okay, I've got all kinds of stuff opening up on my screen here. Okay. I just need to shut down my email, I guess. In terms of the rationale, it's very simple. It's required by Public Law 95-113 that the federal grants provided to HBCUs for their land grant programs be matched by the state on a dollar-for-dollar basis. This is a state obligation, not an obligation for KSU. And because of the increase in the federal funds that KSU has received for the current year, they're at a $671,000 deficit. Okay, go ahead, Sean. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sean and let him present the capital investment request. Go ahead, Sean.
Good morning, everyone. For those who have been around for a while, this request should be very familiar. It's very similar to the request we made 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we asked for $400 million in state investment for capital construction and actually for asset preservation. The request this year, as you see before you, new construction $0 in state general fund dollars is what the council is recommending. Asset preservation, $350 million in the first year of the upcoming biennium, $350 million in the second year. And you can see the debt service amounts for each of those years. A full year's debt service in the first year on $350 million, $25,217,000. And then in the second year, the total debt service in that year would be approximately $50 million. As you can see, we are not recommending a technology infrastructure pool this year as well. So similar to 2 years ago, we are focusing solely on asset preservation as the council's asked for state general fund support. Next slide, please. There we go. As I just mentioned, appropriations of $350 million in both years of the upcoming biennium, and that would be to fund asset preservation at the education and general facilities. So excluding auxiliary facilities, excluding athletics. The funds would be distributed based on an agreed upon 10% base. So $70 million of the $700 million would be distributed. And the remaining funds would be distributed based on the Vfa study needs. So as you may remember, in 2007, the Vfa study was conducted, a comprehensive study of all of the campus's education and general facilities. And the campuses have agreed to this allocation method. Staff recommends that the institutions provide a 50 cent on the dollar match to the $700 million, and there'd be considerable flexibility for the institutions to meet this match. For example, our proposal is that campus funds spent on asset preservation in the current biennium, 2022, in the upcoming biennium, 2022-24, and the subsequent biennium, 24-26, that all campus spending of institutional funds be eligible to be used to help meet that match. Also, another option for the institutions is a $0 match in the first year, and then a dollar for dollar match in the second year. And so that would maintain the 50 cents on the dollar match in the aggregate, but would give them some flexibility, and also it would get those asset preservation projects started much quicker. And we think that would be a big benefit to the Commonwealth and to our campuses. So together, the $700 million in state funding and the $350 million in institutional match would address about 15% of the system total need. So as I said, the Vfa study projected that the need for asset preservation would be about $7.3 billion by 2021. There's been minimal state investment in facilities renovation and renewal since 2008 by the state funded. Investment is needed to maintain the value and safety and security and functionality of state-owned facilities on our campuses. Modern facilities and systems reduce operating costs, and they better serve our students. And as you know, construction costs continue to increase with each passing year. So all of that provides some good rationale for this request. And here's a look at the Vfa study findings. As you can see, they projected that by the time period of 2017 to 2021, the projected accumulated asset preservation need on our campuses would be about $7.3 billion. And then you can see the state investment in asset preservation since the Vfa study was completed has been only about $281 million. So we believe it's a good time to invest in asset preservation. Any questions about the capital construction?
Has anyone taken a look at the impact of not investing in this infrastructure? Clearly, you're going to have buildings and facilities that are no longer useful, which means a reduction in the value. Just as an argument to our legislators to say, you either pay now or you're going to pay later, because those are going to have to be replaced.
It's very true.
To answer your question, Elaine, yes, we have. I mean, and we don't know the full impact. What we know is now we're way over the $7.3 billion asset needs. When I was president at KSU, I will tell you the amount of money I spent just to try to patch a roof because, and you know, that ruined the floor. I mean, it became almost like a whack-a-mole. I mean, it was almost ridiculous to the effect that it was having. And all of our campuses are experiencing that. And the other thing too, I'll just have to throw this in. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that as more of our campuses use debt service to go into a public-private partnership, because that's the only way they can get new buildings in many cases, maybe producing something else we don't want to deal with and down the road. I'm not saying it's not a way to get things done currently, but we're going to have to think of the future, not just having our deteriorated buildings that's going to cost us, but what does it mean when we have our new buildings? How much does that ultimately cost us? I mean, in the way we're actually financing those.
I would like to add that the list of capital projects, it's a very long list that's included in your materials, is a list of capital projects that has been approved by the institutional boards, the campus boards, and that is a list of projects that each of these campuses has deemed worthy and would like authority to complete. Of course, they would not be able to complete all of these projects. And especially with asset preservation, you have to think about all of the different projects that could become imminently necessary to complete in the upcoming biennium, and make sure that they're on the list so that you have the authority to complete those projects if funding becomes available as those projects reach a critical state. So that's just for your consideration. Just a further explanation of the list of projects on in your materials.
Is there any indication that the public infrastructure bill, the federal public infrastructure bill, might make funding available for at least the land grant institutions?
I think that's one of the reasons that the list of projects is so extensive this biennium, because everyone in the public sector is hoping that that federal funds become available.
Okay, let's move on, Sean. The last component of the post-secondary institution request is the trust fund request. And there are two components of the trust fund request, one for the endowment match program and one for a competitive workforce initiative. Next slide. In terms of the endowment match program request, staff is recommending appropriations of $2.4 million in the first year of the biennium, $4.8 million in the second year, to pay debt service on a $60 million bond issue. And this would be the fifth round of funding for the Bucks for Brains program. There were 4 previous rounds of funding between 1998 and 2010. The state provided $410 million over that time period. Those funds were matched dollar for dollar by external source funding provided by the institutions, mostly private fundraising. And so that's a total of $820 million that were either endowed or used for capital construction projects that support research. If the If the requested funding is authorized, it would be housed in 2 trust funds until it's matched by the campuses. $50 million in the Research Challenge Trust Fund, $10 million in the Comprehensive University Excellence Trust Fund. That's consistent with the historical practice of the General Assembly in terms of how those funds would be divided up between the research campuses and the comprehensive universities. The funds in the Research Challenge Trust Fund by statute have to be allocated 1/3 to the University of Kentucky, 2/3 to the University of Louisville. And so we're recommending $33.3 million be allocated to UK, 16.7 million of the 50 million in the Research Challenge Trust Fund for U of L. Also by statute, any funding that's placed in the Comprehensive University Excellence Trust Fund for our comprehensive universities has to be allocated based on each institution's share of sector total net general fund. I've already mentioned that the funds have to be matched dollar for dollar. So if the full amount were authorized by the General Assembly, we're talking about not just $60 million, but $120 million that would be added to university endowments. In terms of the rationale, this has been a highly successful program that encourages private investment in higher education research activities. I've already talked about the $410 million state investment, but that matching feature essentially doubles that state investment in post-secondary education research. Another reason for this request is that it's called for in the 2016-21 strategic agenda. The universities are asked to increase basic, applied, and translational research in Objective 10. And in one of the strategies under Objective 10, it actually mentions the endowment match program specifically, and that the council will advocate for additional funds for the Bucks for Brains program. And by the way, the Bucks for Brains program and endowment match program, those are two names for the same program. They're synonymous. There's no doubt that this program has helped attract faculty with the established research agendas to Kentucky, and they bring their staff, they bring those federal research dollars with them when they locate to Kentucky. And as a result, the Bucks for Brains funding is highly correlated with growth in endowment market values and in sponsored research. And lastly, and this is an important rationale as well, when we were formulating the performance funding model, there was discussion about whether or not to include a metric in that model that rewarded research. And knowing that there was the avenue to use the trust funds to request additional dollars outside of the operating funds request to support research, the decision was made not to include a metric rewarding research in the performance funding model. And so if we want to support the research missions of UK and U of L and also our comprehensive universities, the way to do that is through the endowment match program. Another subcomponent within the trust fund request is the competitive workforce initiative. This is a proposal that was submitted to CPE staff in September, early September, by KCTCS officials. We're recommending appropriations of $2.2 million in the first year of the biennium, $4.5 million in the second year. And these funds would be used to address worker skills gaps and supply gaps in targeted industry sectors. The funding will be used to support expanded education and training and increased completion at every KCTCS college. Also importantly, any authorized funding for this particular program should be treated as a mandated program so that it would be excluded from the KCTCS performance funding model. Next slide, Sean. Here are those targeted industry sectors where we have identified areas of workforce shortages. Healthcare, that need is critical at this particular time, especially given that we're still, in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. Advanced manufacturing, transportation, business services, and IT, and then lastly, construction and trades. If this funding is authorized, it's going to help maintain affordability for Kentucky students and families. It's going to facilitate the recruitment and retention of business and industries into various regions throughout Kentucky, which should have the effect of bolstering regional and state economies. Next slide, Sean. This was a table that was provided to CPE staff by KCTCS officials. It shows for each industry sector how many graduates were produced in the disciplines related to each sector for 2020-21. They pulled some projections for annual job demand from the Kentucky, from KSTAT. And that's shown in that second column of numbers. And so you can calculate the supply gap in that column over to the far right. And as you can see, the supply gap is the largest in the healthcare field that I mentioned earlier, and second, transportation and logistics. Next slide, Sean. So are there any questions about any of the components of the post-secondary institution request before we move forward with our recommendation? Okay, hearing none, CPE staff recommends that the Finance Committee approve the post-secondary institution request, including operating funds, capital investment, and trust fund components as proposed.
Okay, you heard the recommendation. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. This is Elaine.
Thank you. Ms. Walker moves. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Madison. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right, motion carries. Thank you. Next up.
Next slide, Sean. Our CPE agency budget request is the next major component of the three that we discussed at the start of this meeting. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean McKiernan to present this section.
Hello again. I just want to remind everyone before we start about talking about the additions that we'll be requesting. I want to remind everyone our current general fund base and where that funding goes. We have $7.2 million in the component operating funds. That includes agency operations, and then a smaller subset that we label strategic initiatives. $7.2 million in state general fund. Our technology trust fund, which supports the Kentucky Virtual Library, Kentucky Post-Secondary Education Network, and technology support for those systems. $3.6 million in state general fund support, and this is all current fiscal year dollars. We have $500,000 in ovarian cancer screening funds that go to the University of Kentucky. So we're just a pass-through entity for those funds. $50,000 goes to the Doctoral Scholars Program. We'll talk about that in a moment. And CPE pays the state's SREB dues, a Southern Regional Education Board dues. So that funding, $214,800. So $11.6 million in a general fund based funding for CPE. And the additional funds for our operating budget that they were requesting, that staff's suggesting, is in the following components: defined calculations, the Doctoral Scholars Program, expanded duties and responsibilities, education continuum, and a healthcare initiative. We'll talk about each of these components in more detail presently. So the first component, defined calculations, the State Budget Office and LRC Budget Review Office have some guidelines as to cost increases and other elements that we're essentially instructed to request as part of our operating budget. And so they identify these cost increases and calculate them for you. And so they're lumped into the category defined calculations. And they include a 1% salary increase, healthcare cost increase, which is a 10% per year, workers' comp premium increase, a pretty sizable increase for CPE and the upcoming biennium, and then also a small increase on our lease payment to the state. The current year appropriation, that $222,900, is so that to cover the general fund portion of payroll that would allow us to essentially catch up So currently, we pay the last payroll of the year in the next fiscal year. And that was a one-time way to save some state dollars. And so this year they're trying to catch up. And so that's what that current year appropriation amount represents. The next component, SREB doctoral scholars. Currently, we have $50,000 in that program, and that funds, it essentially funds two positions, or two doctoral candidates, one at the University of Kentucky, one at the University of Louisville. Both of those institutions match that funding. So in essence, it provides funding for 4 individuals, 2 at UK and 2 at U of L. It's designed to be a 3-year program. And so at that $50,000 per year level, we're really only able to fund one set of students. And so an additional $50,000 in the first year of the upcoming biennium would allow us to essentially add a class for this program. And this program's goal is to increase the number of underrepresented minority scholars and members of the professoriate in Kentucky. And so in the second year of the biennium, there would be 3 classes. And so essentially build out this program at a very low cost. It's a very, very positive program. And so we've been included that in our recommendation. And then under the category expanded duties and responsibilities, just a reminder that since 2007-08, CPE staff has lost a number of individuals due to budget constraints. So we had 97 positions that were funded by the State General Fund in 07-08. We're down to about 45 positions. So this would help build us back up, but also, during that time period, our statutory and responsibilities and expanded due diligence and oversight role has increased. And these 7 positions will, in the first year, will help fill that. Will help us respond to that increase in duties and responsibilities. So we've outlined it as 1 associate vice president and executive director, a director position, and then 4 senior associates. And this funding will allow the expansion of CPE's role in connecting higher education to workforce and economic development, monitoring post-secondary institution finances, and evaluating academic programs. In the second year, the reason for the increase from year 1 to year 2, we have some private grant dollars that will not be available in the second year of the biennium. And these grant dollars support 3 positions with the Student Success Collaborative. It's an executive director and 2 assistant directors. The Student Success Collaborative aims to improve student success, improving graduation rates, closing equity gaps at the community colleges and at the 4-year campuses through improving credit transfer, redesigning developmental education, particularly working with mid-level managers, deans, directors, and program chairs. And so this is essentially replacement funding for those positions.
Board, I just want to jump in to say, committee, that this was a collaborative that James Graham Brown funded for us. Now we hope to also down the road bring in more grant dollars to help support this effort, but this is put it in perspective. We used to have a big academic affairs area that went to do all this work. We designed a new innovative system to be able to actually expand the footprint with the best practices, build new practices, have a lot of beta sites for improvement. So in that regard, if you think about what we're trying to accomplish here is to sustain this and to create an ongoing process around student success. In academic affairs, when I took over this area in 2009, I don't know how many people I had, a lot, 13, 14, 15, that we did a lot of stuff. Now in that area, there's really 2. well, 3, we just hired another person, thank goodness. But the Student Success Collaborative is taking a big piece of that process. As you all know, when I took over CPE, we redesigned CPE as a whole to focus on what we consider to be the needs of the future, you know, around workforce, around the P20 pipeline, around this student success effort and so on. So I wanted to put that in perspective so you'll know where this is coming from.
The next component in the budget request for agency operating is the Commonwealth Education Continuum, $1.2 million in the first year and 3.2 in the second year. The Commonwealth Education Continuum is a partnership between KDE, Education and Workforce Development Cabinet, and CPE that seeks to improve connections between P12 education, post-secondary education, and employers. And it's designed to benefit Kentucky students and families and the state as a whole. This funding would support additional and improved advising for high school students, about $4 million over the biennium, and improve early post-secondary opportunities through dual credit oversight and other early post-secondary opportunities other opportunities to gain credit for higher education while still in high school, particularly through online resources and professional developmental opportunities for teachers. The Healthcare Workforce Initiative is a new initiative.
Sean, may I ask real
Yes,
quick
please.
back on the Continuum? Is there a similar entry, to your knowledge, from KDE and their budget request?
I know that there are considerable federal funds that will be added to this this request, and those are still being hammered down, and there's discussion about which entity will be requesting those funds, and there's some moving parts, but this is not the totality of the program. So that's a very good point. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, Eric, let me answer that specifically. We are getting some federal dollars to kick off some of these things now from KDE. I don't know exactly what's going to be in their budget or the workforce cabinet's budget, or how much the lieutenant governor, but these parts that we're asking for truly are what we call those transition pipelines that CPE has control over, if you want to call it that. My guess is that the Education Workforce Cabinet will be looking at the other end of the continuum. They'll be asking for money for using them or whatever money they have around that end, and KDE will be looking at some of the early pieces of this for their budget. Now, whether they ask for it under the continuum or not, I don't know, but we're the only unit of the 3 that actually has taken their base budget and really redesigned the organization with this as a title.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
And to President Thompson's point, this funding is on top of the staff resources that CPE is currently devoting to the continuum.
Yeah, these are programmatic operating items to send out to folk. We've already redesigned our base budget to include the staff that we have to kind of run all this stuff. But some of this money would be to bring in people to do some of the programmatic items, especially around issues of everything from the college coaches to dual credit that's out there.
And finally, the last component, the Healthcare Workforce Initiative, $20 million in each fiscal year. These would be pass-through primarily funds, but some program support funds that would remain at CPE to help public post-secondary institutions
Thanks very much, Sean. And do I have a motion to adopt those 2 recommendations?
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Madison. Second by Richard. Any further discussion or questions? If none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, no. And it passes. Thanks very much. And we move then to the special appropriation.
Bill, you're muted.
And, you know, I was doing so well too. Thank you, Sean. The next and the third and last major component of staff's recommendation for post-secondary education is the special appropriation for Kentucky State University. Go on to the next slide, Sean. And there are essentially 2 components that we're recommending as part of that special appropriation: a KSU Financial Stabilization Fund, $23 million in the current year in non-recurring funding, and then $1 million each year of the upcoming biennium for some strategic operating funds for KSU. And I'm going to ask you to skip the next slide, Sean, and go to the next one after that. You've got a fairly detailed description in the agenda item that was sent out late yesterday afternoon that explains how Kentucky State University got into the financial situation that it's in currently. But I just want to highlight a couple of things that are in the agenda item. Number one, beginning in 2017-18, KSU's cash position began to deteriorate. Prior to that, the university cash position remained stable at a level between $18 and $20 million. Beginning in 2018-19 and continuing on into 2019-20, cash declined to the point where it was between $2 and $3 million in both of those years. At the same time that cash was declining, current liabilities were increasing significantly. The combination of the declining cash balances and increasing liabilities have resulted in a significant liquidity crisis for the university. And on the second page of this agenda item, I think this one sentence more or less sums it up. Expenditures have exceeded revenues by over $35 million over the past 4 years and have depleted both the unrestricted university fund balance and unrestricted asset balances. So the university has been expending much more than it's been taking in, and they've depleted their reserves. In July and August of the current year, the university has been operating with about 13 days of cash on hand. Most industry experts would recommend 90 days cash on hand at a minimum for a university. Now, President Thompson and Travis Powell made a presentation to the KSU board, I want to say about 2 weeks ago. They both did an outstanding job, and they're going to follow up next week and share the presentation with the council that they shared with the KSU board. But this slide right here more or less summed up the current financial status that KSU is in. And this has been verified by CPE staff. Their deficit on their construction accounts with the state by $5.2 million. They needed $4.3 million to pay invoices from the prior year. They expended asset preservation fee receipts that should have been restricted and used for asset preservation projects. And so they need to refund their asset preservation fee account. And then lastly, the July repayment of prior year revenue anticipation notes totals $5 million. So the current year cash shortfall is $15.7 million. The structural imbalance in terms of the FY22 university budget is roughly $7 million. So the total projected cash shortfall for fiscal year 2021-22 is $23 million. Okay, previous slide, Sean. So that's the basis for our recommendation. The Financial Stabilization Fund is to get KSU the dollars that they need in the current year to address all of those items that were identified on the previous slide. The budget bill language is going to allow CPE to verify that proper financial controls are in place and other milestones are reached before KSU has access to the funds. What we're going to recommend to the governor and the General Assembly is that they create a funding program. It will be an account for KSU, but they will have to bring a spending plan to the council and get the council's approval in order to access those funds. And as that bullet indicates, we're going to make sure that they've got the proper financial controls in place and that they reach certain milestones in order to access those funds. In terms of the strategic operating funds, $1 million in recurring funding each year of the upcoming biennium. We're recommending that those funds be used to bolster education and public administration programs at KSU. And I'll let President Thompson jump in here, but I've heard him on several occasions say, we don't just want KSU to survive this financial crisis. We want them to thrive. And these operating funds are necessary to get the ship in the right direction, once we get it righted with the financial stabilization funds. Lastly, CPE will have considered.
Bill, let me jump in here really fast.
Yeah.
Go farther. Two quick things. Just let the committee know, Bill mentioned this already, but next week y'all will get the full presentation in the board meeting or in the work meeting. So know you'll get that. Number two, just with we are also, as we're developing, we're restructuring KSU in many ways before it's over with. A part of that restructure will be taking some of the units, and they've got money in those units. So this is not, this strategic operating funds isn't designed to build up anything brand new, but it is designed to enhance some of the areas that they're going to have to enhance, in my opinion, to get where they need to go. One will be the School of Education as an example, to really build out a state-of-the-art that would school that would be able to attract, promote students through the pipeline, to put them in teacher education, students of color, as well as building a professional development shop that would stand, with a lack of a better phrase, on its own, that would be working with other institutions, higher ed institutions, but mainly P-12 institutions in the professional development area, about making sure that they know how to work with all students of all backgrounds. So that's one example. The other will be to create an adult learner initiative that will be brand new probably. That kids, since we're going to have to restructure things anyway, we thought about building out the things we need to build. One may be redesigning a public administration area that will focus on state government, to build out a commuter pipeline, if you will, with relationships with state government. So those are some of the examples that we are looking at, just knowing that they are bringing whatever money they have in those units to the table also. So this is not really, other than the adult learner initiative, probably, we're not probably talking about creating anything from a zero-based budget.
Go ahead and back up, Sean, one more. Thank you for those comments, President Thompson. That last bullet, I just wanted to hit that. CPE will have considerable financial oversight of KSU in the upcoming biennium. This is alluded to in the governor's executive order, and you'll be hearing more about that at the work session next week when President Thompson and Travis Powell go into this in greater detail. All right, go ahead, Sean. Any questions?
Bill, this is Richard. Thank you. And I think this is for Dr. Thompson. Aaron, thank you for the filling us in a little bit, and especially for the going beyond just the what's needed to help KSU, but casting a vision and looking ahead. I've got a couple questions, and I don't know how much detail was in the report. I've not seen the report, but do we know how KSU arrived at this financial situation? I guess that's the first question.
We do, and it is in the report in great detail. As a matter of fact, now I will tell you, Richard, there's some of the places where there's some nickel and dime stuff. I call it nickel and dimes. It adds up, right? That we may not be able to put our fingers exactly on it, but we have the big buckets where we know it's taken place. What we also know, though, in all fairness, just put it on the table, this 23 million is just for this year, if you will. They'll have a structural shortfall next year even. We're not asking for that, but there'll be a structural shortfall next year. But anyway, you didn't ask for that piece. The answer is yes, and we will go over those pieces in the full detail next week.
Okay.
But it's a really long presentation, by the way.
Okay. And I do have, and I don't really know other than what's hit the major media outlets, but I do have concern as to how we arrive at a situation like this in a public institution. And I think so my answer, and I'm just to be very clear, I'm for KSU. I want them to thrive. I want the ship to right itself. But I think it's important to have some understanding of how they arrived at that before there's this special appropriation is whether or not it goes forward. And again, I'm not for it or against it. That's one question that I have in my mind. And the second thing, and this was really good to see in Bill's presentation, is the financial controls that would be part of this appropriation. Is there an idea, or can you share what this would look like? For example, would the CPE staff be part of that to ensure, in particular, I'm wondering, can we ensure that the money, if we did this special appropriation, would it go to those specific bills that are due that were broken down in the previous slide?
All of those are fair and good questions, Richard, and I don't blame you for asking those. That's why we wanted to present this next week before the full board meeting, so you'll have all the details before you officially vote from the full board of any appropriation. So yes, you will have a chance to sink your teeth into all of it. The second question, and probably I'm going to add a third that you are kind of asking, but I'm going to answer a third anyway. We believe that the financial oversights here were not as, I mean, there's all kinds of questions there in that alone. Whether or not people followed policy, whether there were policies in place, whether or not there were appropriations. I could keep on going forever with this. We then, to answer your second question, we are arguing, not we are arguing, the governor did, and I think the legislature will argue more, that we are going to have things in place at least for a significant amount of time to ensure that these public funds being infused again will be used in the way to get exactly the outcome that all of us have argued, including you. We want KSU to be a strong, viable institution. CPE is going to have to be a part of that. What this board should know, that you didn't ask me, but what this board should know is that we don't have people to do that right now. I mean, we barely have enough people to do what we're doing. And so a part of what you saw in your last budget was a piece of those dollars we're asking to get people to do that. We're anticipating, based on the executive order, and we're anticipating based on conversations we've had now, both in the House and the Senate, if they put money here, they'll want CPE to have more than just what we call a coordinating oversight, but a strong hand in the financial oversight and in seeing and making sure that those dollars and the structure of the campus are designed in such a way that it gets what we purport that they're investing in. So I don't know what that's going to look like in legislation yet. Obviously, I have not seen legislation around it. But my guess is that if the House and the Senate goes with the governor's EO, we'll be probably engaged with KSU for a long time, sir, at a strong oversight. Not the kind of oversight we normally have with all of our campuses.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Thompson, do you see inclusion of additional appropriations for CPE in the KSU legislation?
Well, the way that Budget Director Hicks' office has asked us, the way we have to do it is put it in our agency budget if it's coming to us, and that's what you all approved earlier. So we have that included with anticipation. Now, what we did though, Elaine, you may be asking me, what we put in there was what we thought would be the case based on the governor's executive order. If the House and the Senate goes deeper, more complete, then we may have to come back to you and say we're probably going to need another $1 or $2. So what we put in there is just our anticipation of what we think that if the House and the Senate codifies the executive order, what we anticipate be the case. But you've already approved that. We're not asking for a lot in that area, by the way, if you notice, because what we're talking about here is we're talking about, and once again, the board, I was able to save money in my budget by not hiring people, by not doing other things. And we've used that money this year, all of it, as a matter of fact, to bring in people to help us verify what's going on in KSU. like Susan Krause from, UK, the former treasurer there. So the money we're using this year in the process now was not appropriated to be used that way. It was money that I was able to save, but we're going to run out of that ourselves probably somewhere in January or February. So, but we did ask for that in our agency budget with the
Thank you.
anticipation. If for some reason they decide not to do this, then my guess is we won't get that money either by appropriations.
Does anyone have any other questions about the special appropriation request for KSU? Okay, hearing none, staff is recommending that the Finance Committee approve the special appropriation for KSU, including the Financial Stabilization Fund and Strategic Operating Funds components as proposed by staff.
All right, thank you. And I would just like to add, I'm sure we all feel this way, a special thanks to Dr. Thompson and Travis and so many others on staff who are putting in unbelievable hours in support of KSU. And I'm not sure that anyone outside of our organization appreciates that. And hopefully we can spread that word and the need to help them and help us help them with, if nothing else, funding. So that's
Eric,
it. Yeah, Richard.
I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say I appreciate Dr. Thompson's hard work and long hours that he's put into it. I know, obviously, Dr. Thompson, you know a lot more than all of us. I don't know enough, as I mentioned earlier, as to how KSU got into this situation. And my concern is, I guess, the accountability mechanism. Again, for KSU, I want them to succeed and thrive. I love your vision for how they can succeed in the future. I don't have enough information right now to vote in favor of this. So that's my 2 cents. I wish I knew more going into this vote, but that's where I am.
And what we sent out to you, I think, Richard, earlier, what we know so far, I don't know if you got that packet or not. I think we sent it to all the board. So you'll have what we had. Now, there's a lot of discussion that can go in there because that's just paper, right? The piece that I will tell you is simply this, and I want to be careful how I say this, but I mean, all the things, Elaine, you asked earlier, that's not accounting for any of our current staff time. I won't tell you how many hours I've worked last week. It just makes it sound like I've got a little violin to play. But all of that isn't designed in our job description, right? So any of the things that we're asking for, even our budget, will only cover about half of what we're going to expend. So I wanted to say that. Richard, your statement about knowing more, I appreciate that statement. And to be honest with you, I am upset that we got here again. As you all know, I was there in 2016, 17. We felt like we put them on the right track. And if you see the data, it shows that, in fact, that was the case. So I don't blame you for being wary or even being cautious in that regard. What I will tell this committee is this is our only, in my opinion, only choice for to keep it a viable, stable, state-supported HBCU. I don't, or I wouldn't obviously be bringing it to you. So I did want to say that too.
And Richard, I think you have a very good point, and a cautionary tale is probably not a strong enough statement about this. And, I think we need to know what more can CPE do in the future. And we may need, Travis could perhaps comment on this, but there may be need to be more oversight allowed by statute to help us avoid this type of a thing in the future. So,
And Richard, I just want to point this out too, and I think it's to Dr. Thompson's point. The ability for KSU to be in a position where it satisfies the financial requirements of SAC-COC to maintain their accreditation is something that I know from experience they look at where they are at the given moment. Not necessarily what's happened, but are they in compliance now? And my fear would be that without this special appropriation, there could be some question as to that. It doesn't mean that we don't need to understand, and I think you raise just a really great point of how we make sure there are systems and controls in place so that never happens again, because that's also an accreditation question. Yeah. But if we wait to completely understand that before we put them on viable financial footing, we could also cause accreditation issues for Kentucky State, and so we've got to look at it from multiple angles and confront this on multiple fronts simultaneously.
Madison, your point.
You're absolutely right. And I didn't want to go into all those details today because I knew we were short on time, but you're absolutely right. There's multiple issues here. There's multiple outcomes that could happen without this appropriation. First of all, we've already used up our fourth quarter allotment for our first quarter at KSU. I mean, that's one thing. In other words, they're broke here. Now, they have some federal funds, but they can't be spent on this. So there are some accreditation issues that would come into place. The other thing I will say, and I don't know how much longer I'll be at CPE, right? This is probably going to have to go far past my tenure at CPE, because I do believe that, Richard, your statement is one, and I take it not necessarily as whether you support the appropriation or not, but that we ensure that if we do this, that we have a system in place that makes sure that this doesn't happen again. I mean, that's the way I'm interpreting it anyway. I could be wrong, but I have the same issue, if that's the way you're saying it. For me, the 23 million, this is going to sound odd, it's my taxpayers' money too, but 23 million is not the bother for me. The bother for me is that we make sure that we get everything squared away, structure, process, oversight, assessment for continuous improvement, that we get all that in place. And that, to me, I think is the real challenge of this board, to work with us to do that. That's the real issue for me. And it sounds odd, and it's not the 23 million. Anyway, I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, Dr. Thompson, I'm sorry. So, Dr. Thompson, I agree. It is the procedure, it is the structure, it is the accountability that I'm more concerned about. $23 million is a significant amount of money, but I'm more concerned that this does not happen again in the future. So that's one point. Back to Madison's point. Madison, your point is well taken about accreditation. That's a real consideration. My question is, and maybe this was mentioned, Dr. Thompson, maybe you had mentioned this, but is the accreditation up for review in the near future? How imminent is that? Do we know?
It's not up for review in the near future. It's already happened, but I will tell you, we have talked with SAC-COC. They know what this issue is and that CPE is engaged, and they're happy that we're engaged. I think it's a fair statement. Madison can tell me more, but they don't have to be up for review when it comes to these sorts of things. They can come in and look at this immediately.
Well, and I'll just mention, Aaron, I think they were affirmed back in 2019, which obviously wasn't very long ago, but you'll see in this in our full report that we provide next week. But, they were looking at the time at 2018 financial statements, which things were starting to go a little bit in the, wrong direction then, but not very much. But there was a precipitous drop in 2019. But the audited financial statements weren't prepared for review there for SAC-COC during that process. So they were recently reaffirmed. So, but obviously, as Dr. Thompson has mentioned, they can come in at any time when there's an issue. So,
hey,
Dr.
Travis.
Thompson.
Travis,
Go
I've got a question for you because you've been the one that's been coordinating, sections of the report that Susan Krause is working on and Ryan Kaffenberger has worked on. But I've read some sections of that report. If KSU's payroll, if I remember correctly, is over $3 million, monthly, how are they going to meet payroll if they've already advanced their fourth quarter allotment? If they don't have the funding that we're requesting?
Well, according to, and we've confirmed this from Greg Rush, their CFO, as presented on this to legislative committees, and we'll talk about this again next week. But if they don't, without an infusion of cash, they will in April, they will run out of operating funds. So,
Dr. Thompson, I had a question. You have been there. You have taken the reins over a period, helped to right the ship. How comfortable are you with this allotment, with this arrangement, as long as it's agreed to that CPE has a firm hand in that management?
I'm very confident. The part I will tell you that, this is the minimum. If I was leaving that to Greg Rush, he's not here, it'd be a lot more because they're going to have probably a $7 million deficit the next year, even with this. Now, I'm very transparent. And as you well know, if you follow this, we've been so transparent, it's been kind of scary. But I'm confident that we can do what we need to do, or that we at CPE will make sure we find the right people to do it, to ensure that this is the case. One of the pieces, Elaine, that you are alluding to, I think, is 2016-17, when I went over and I experienced some heavy hassle. I'll just say that. I'll let you go back and read the newspaper reports. But we did get them back to square one. We did get them back to a balanced budget. We did get them back to put some structures in place, even though I wasn't there long enough to put all the structures in place, but we did align it in a way that, and our numbers will show that. I think Travis will tell you and Bill will tell you.
they will.
The issue that we had in that management, there was no oversight after that. There was an assumption that everything was going to be done correctly. In this case, it was not, period. There was a lack of great financial oversight. I'm not throwing rocks at anybody. I'll let you, you can ask those questions if you like. What we have to have in place now is good financial oversight. I believe in my people here at CPE, and I believe in being able to find people that we can believe in here at CPE to do that. So that's the most direct way I know how to answer your question.
Thank you.
So Dr. Thompson, what I'm hearing you say is that if we approve this special appropriation, that CPE will have some oversight. There are controls on the CPE side. I must have missed that earlier, but is that correct?
That is the only way I would recommend this to you, sir. Straightforward. I'll just be honest. Now, we have to get some money to help us to do that. But we've done it this year. There's no, I'm not saying I don't have trust in people. I'm just saying that I have data. I have a background here. And I'm saying that if the state's going to put, once again, their dollars into it this way, us as a state agency that represents all of higher ed and the needs of the state, I would be remiss as president of CPE that we didn't take a more active role in ensuring that the state dollars are spent in the best way possible. Yes, I would not recommend this to you unless I was recommending to this board to approve us to have more oversight in the future. And that's what the governor's EO is saying. And that's what the Senate and the House membership that we've talked to so far is saying, that that's the only way they think. I think they'll approve it, is that if that happens.
Thank you.
Well, and
helpful.
President Oh, Richard, this goes to your question as well. And I think we touched on this in the presentation, but there's a little more detail in the agenda item. We're going to ask the General Assembly to create a funding program. Of course, they created the original 6 strategic investment and incentive trust funds. And over previous biennia, they from time to time have created what's called a funding program, which is very similar to a trust fund, which means there's considerable council oversight, like for the endowment match program. We'll have to bring a set of guidelines for council approval. There's oversight. UK, U of L, the other comprehensive universities, when they submit a request for Bucks for Brains dollars, those requests come to CPE. We have to approve those before they can access those funds. A funding program works exactly the same way. There will be an account for KSU, but they will not be allowed to access those funds until they get approval from this board. So if there's $23 million approved by this council and authorized by the General Assembly, those dollars will go into that funding program. KSU will have to come through the Council on Post-Secondary Education to get your permission to access those dollars. So that's part of those financial controls that President Thompson was just talking about.
And I'm going one step farther. It's not that just they go through to get the dollars, is that we need to follow up to make sure those dollars are spent exactly in the way that we want to spend those dollars. So I mean, I understand that this big brother statement may scare some people, may even bother other campuses, but this is not somehow CPE is trying to usurp power to get power. I mean, as a matter of fact, that this is, y'all are not paying me any more for this, by the way, I noticed. But bottom line, this is about us doing what we need to do as a state agency, even beyond the protocols to get the money. It's the protocols how the money are being used in a way that gets what we need to get.
Well, and just I'll mention, this, again, it's not a situation of Big Brother. It's really a partnership. And I mean, we're talking about the financial controls here, but we haven't discussed any, the management improvement plan piece too, that we've talked about with their board. And I'll just mention some of the items there. We've talked about reviewing their policies and procedures to ensure compliance with state and federal law, guidelines for salary ranges and benefits for all their employees, board member training about financial oversight, looking at their organizational structure and how they develop their human talent, looking at their academic programs and course offerings and faculty productivity, and looking at their accounting and fiscal reporting system, student success and enrollment management. I mean, that's beyond just the financial piece, and we're going to get into all that stuff as well moving forward with KSU. I mean, that's the second part of the executive order. So we're going to be fulfilling that requirement as well.
I've got a question. Not sure if Bill or if Dr. Thompson can answer this. Are we looking at hiring another staff person at CPE just to overlook this? Is that what I was hearing you say, Dr. Thompson? And if so, we're going to have
to have more than one. If you think about it, just the financial oversight alone. I mean, we have Susan Krause that, I mean, are we doing checking and double checking? Yes. Is it redundant? Yes. Is it all those things? Yes. But we're going to also have to look at how we're building out the student success infrastructure, how we're building out the academic infrastructure, how we're building programs for the future, how we're doing all that. And to do that in a reasonable amount of time, that's going to take a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to be doing, I mean, there's not enough staff that we could hire to do all of that. But we're going to have people at CPE that works with the campuses to ensure that those items are in place. The EO calls for us to do that, by the way. So Richard, that's part of what you approved earlier was for a budget was to hire a few of those people.
Okay. That was my second question, by the way.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just say that there's a good chance that we'll probably ask, I'm not sure what Greg's future is, probably ask Greg Rush to come back to CPE and do a lot of that one part of the oversight. Sorry, Richard, I disturbed you.
No. That's good. This is helpful, and I appreciate this conversation. I'm trying to get my mind around this issue better and just what the best thing to do is. But with what's been shared, I have more clarity, and my opinion is shifting a bit as to CPE, at least my vote on this. I'm looking at it a little differently. My concern again, and it's not that I don't have concern about how KSU got in this situation. I still am concerned about that, but the measures that are put in place with this this special appropriation, I feel a little more confident about what's been done, about the proposal, and also the urgency to help them. So my opinion is shifting on this. I appreciate everybody's time and discussing more on this.
I'd also like to thank you for explaining that it's not just a special appropriation, it's a trust fund, which I think changes a whole dynamic of how the funds are going to be distributed, how the oversight is going to occur. That certainly gives a lot of confidence that they're going to be spent wisely.
And I think both of you bringing up a point. Mr. Chair, I know we're getting short on time, but I do want to make one other statement. The issues that I dealt with when I went over in 2016, 17, these issues are different than those issues I dealt with. So these are new issues that happened, right? There were a variety of new things that have happened. That's why I think it is important that we have the oversight to ensure, because there could be other new issues that popped up, even if we know all the things that happened in the past, and we do. That alone, if we just paid attention to that, that still will not get you the confidence that you need. You need to have confidence that we're looking at a variety of things. Number one, that may not have happened that got us here. Number two is that we're also working hard on what I call the strength model and helping them to design a system of self-sustainability, true enough, but to thrive, that they become even a more essential need for Kentucky. I mean, in providing what they need. I'm talking about building out a strong HBCU residential system, true enough, but also building out a strong commuter adult learner system that kind of feeds the infrastructure that we need to have in Kentucky. So to me, this is also about helping KSU provide a need that we have in Kentucky as a whole, not just a need for KSU. So I'm not willing just to look at it in this micro way, if you will, and from a deficit model. The things they've done, we're going to ensure they don't do again. I don't think that gets us very far. We got to do that, yeah. But also building out what we think that is good for the state and looking at the possibilities that something else could pop up that we want to ensure that doesn't pop up. And I hope that explains a little more.
Travis, do you have something too?
Oh, no, I mean, it's, this has been a great discussion. Like I said, I expect to have a very in-depth discussion when we present this to the full board. I mean, we sent around the presentation that we gave to the KSU board, and it'll be very similar to that. Plus we have a full report that backs up that information, but we've got a lot to share. And like I said, really proud of the work that we did on this and excited to share it with you. And I don't think the funds, it's unquestionable that there will be oversight attached to the funds. I don't think anybody would be comfortable, General Assembly or the governor, with just, handing the funds over and moving on as is. So and we certainly plan to be involved in that and have really got a lot of good information about some of the things that need to be updated and changed in order to help, provide more financial accountability moving on in the future. And again, happy to share, excited to be able to share that with you all next week.
Thank you. Could we see the recommendation on the screen again, perhaps? It wouldn't hurt to see the wording of that in light of our discussion. Sean?
I am working on it. One moment.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad I'm not the only one that has trouble with that. Okay. Is there anything about that wording that would make Richard make you feel more comfortable as far as a reference to CPE oversight? And Dr. Thompson or Travis, let me know, or Bill, anybody, let me know if that's
Would there be a problem if trust fund was incorporated in that at any place?
Elaine, I don't know who you're asking, but I'll jump in. And I agree in the big picture scheme of things. I like the direction that we're going in regards to KSU's future. My question that's still hanging out there, and I'm trying to, and y'all gals, I'm trying to find a way to support this, but I guess there's the unknown of how we got here in the first place. It seems, at least for me, and I honestly trying to find a way to support KSU and help them out of this lurch that they're in. But if there are some questions out there as to, I don't know. I honestly just don't know enough as to how they got here. It seems that I don't know, cart before the horse, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I need to delve deeper, but that's the only thing holding me back, I guess. So we approve. So Elaine, if we approve, you put the word trust fund in there, and I'm not against that, but it seems to be there should be more clarity as to what happened first, at least from my perspective. So.
Richard, we do have that. I think I don't know if you had a chance to read that PowerPoint that we sent to you yet in great detail, but we talk about what we know that's taken place. We're working very closely with all the entities of the state to provide them the information that we have. The point that I will tell you is that there are some little things that you may not ever be able to find out. I mean, for an example, there's some very legitimate items such as money spent on student success. So not all the money was spent in a way that would argue malfeasance. However, there's some money that was spent that we don't know if it's malfeasance or what, right? But there are, in that report we gave you, we go in great detail and very honest detail. And next week, we'll even have a 2-hour session on talking with the board about this. And great, it may not be 2 hours, however long y'all want to make it, but about all of those items. I will tell you this, I feel good that we have a good sense. I'll ask Travis to speak to it because he's been leading, great job, by the way, Travis, been leading a lot of this along with Greg Rush and Susan Krause, former treasurer of KSU, of UK, I'm sorry, and people on my end. So we've got a lot of information that we know already about how money was spent.
Well, I will thank you for that additional paragraph because I think that it really clarifies what we're looking at. And the fact that CPE has gone in depth in its analysis of what did go wrong, you're not going to be surprised by it in the future. You've got that in your back pocket. We haven't received our formal presentation yet, but I feel confident that CPE staff has an understanding and can make sure that those pitfalls are avoided going to the future. I really appreciate that additional paragraph.
What this committee can do, and I'm not suggesting this, Mr. Chair, but what this committee could do is to table the motion on this until you have the work session next week. Then Richard, you would have all your information, or at least all the information we got, I will say.
Yeah, Richard, and I will tell you, please do take a look at the presentation, but the report, it actually really goes into a lot of detail as to that, to your very question about how we got here. It's trends analysis starting in 2016, 17 and analyzing audited financial statements. And we looked at the internal financial controls and we interviewed staff. All that stuff's in there. And we'll talk about that next week. So just, be prepared, but I think you'll get all the answers to your questions in due time.
And we are working with the budget director, John Hicks, and with other people in governor's office and with talking with legislature, as well as sending any information we need to if the auditor is asking or anybody else. We are being very transparent. And so the relationships that CPE has and with all the parties, I think is a very strong relationship. So I just want to say that I'm proud of that in addition to all these other pieces.
To Elaine's point, the being able to recognize this in the future and so forth, I mean, we wouldn't have been able to get into the meat of this though without the executive order. Am I correct, Travis? I mean, so being able to see these things.
Yes, not at the level that we did. No, absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine that we would not have sought to go in and try to at least see what was going on and kind of where we're at, but we certainly would not have been able to do it at the level we did without the executive order and the directive from the governor. Absolutely not.
And I mean, that's not something we want to do on a regular basis by any stretch, but there may be a need, you know, if there's going to be a check and balance at CPE, I don't know that we have the tools for that, Travis. Do we?
Yes. I mean, the check and balance as to how the funds are being spent.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we have we certainly have the mind power here. Whether we have the manpower to do it on the regular basis, you know, is another question. And you know, we talked about, you know, getting, you know, the additional appropriation to help do some of that stuff. And I mean, we have the ability and the capacity to do it from a, you know, we have staff that know this stuff and that can look at it and that are experts in this. But, you know, and especially with the special appropriation and just assuring that those funds are being spent appropriately and allocated to the items identified in that previous slide there. Yeah, we absolutely can do that.
Well,
Eric, I think what you're asking is, no, we would have to have the EO codified because we don't have under current powers.
I see what you're saying.
The abilities to do this without the EO being codified.
Yeah, or yeah. Is that the question?
Yeah, it is, because I knew we got the mind and the horsepower.
Yeah. Yes, right. I thought you were talking about a staffing issue, but yes, no, I mean, we could do it, but yeah, we would, I mean, there would need to be an additional language in the appropriation to outline how that, you know, that we would be responsible for managing this trust fund. Essentially, that would be set up on KSU's behalf. And, you know, we would manage that, and all draws would only be made from that trust fund unless we authorize those. So.
But even beyond that, I'm talking about the other piece of the EO that I think is even more than just the 23 million we're asking for. That other piece are those pieces that I know we get lost in the money, and I'm not trying to keep us from not getting lost in the money, but as a board that oversees higher education and good outcomes, I tend to get lost in the other stuff a little more. Not that I don't think the money's important. I just want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and that KSU has an ability to strengthen its marketplace, its footprint in the marketplace, that makes it even more of a viable institution to the state.
Blaine, did you have another?
No, I guess I'd like to ask Dr. Thompson and staff if they're comfortable with that second bullet point.
I am indeed, because I would want, as I've been, for those who know me on this board well, I'm so transparent with you all, I'm sure to the times where y'all wish I'd shut up. But this just offers really more transparency and more opportunity to ensure that things just doesn't happen again. So Elaine, I do feel comfortable with that.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, Ms. Walker, since I drafted that bullet, I'm comfortable with it.
I've got another question. If this appropriation was eventually approved, when will it be made available to KSU? Is this immediate upon approval, or when would this go into effect?
We don't know. It depends on what the budget bill says. More than likely, the first part of this is one-time money anyway, and they may have that. So it needs to be made available as soon as they can. Basically, Mr. Nelson, they are in need of this year. You know, normally you'd wait to see an appropriation happen starting July 1 after the budget session is over. But being one-time money, my guess is that we would ask that they would make it available this year immediately.
Yeah, it would be a current year appropriation.
The reality is they'd be out of operating capital before the legislative session is over.
Right,
Yeah.
right about at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's another question. With the CPE operating budget that we just approved, where would the controls be if this money was made available before the end of the year? Is CPE staff able to overlook to make sure that the funds are expended as we're approving them?
Yes.
We would
Go
make
ahead.
that happen, Richard. The issue is if we can continue, we couldn't continue that without extra funding.
Yeah,
I'm
we
being
could.
very
Yeah,
straightforward.
I'm sorry, Dr. Tom, but yeah, we could manage it for the rest of the fiscal year, obviously, for the next, for the remaining 3 or 4 months. Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Now, what that does, and I'm not trying to raise any concern, but what that does is keeps us from doing some of the other things we may have told you we were going to do. Now, we're going to do those anyway, but this is money diverted, as you well know. I mean, y'all understand how this works. This is money that we've been able to save that normally we would put in place to do other things with. But yes, we can. And there's a good chance we'll look at, helping KSU to hire a CFO and bring Greg Brush back on a part-time or full-time basis to help us to do more of that, since he has a really good idea and about how these work. But I think that's a very good question. I think it's a very good agency question.
Thank you.
President Thompson, I've consulted with Ron Carson and Sean McKiernan, who both used to work in the budget office. And they've informed me that when the General Assembly comes into session in January, they could go ahead and enact fairly quickly a special appropriations bill that deals just with this KSU funding recommendation. And that upon passage of that bill, if they funded it quickly, it could be mid-January when the funds could become available. And given what Travis told us earlier about KSU not being able to make payroll past April, I don't think we would be able to wait until the budget is enacted, the regular budget bill on April 15th.
And we would love to get this squared away early if we could.
Okay, we have a revised recommendation to approve and endorse to the full council. This is very healthy discussion, and I'm so pleased we've had it. Are there any, well, first, may I have a motion to adopt these 2 recommendations before us?
I move we adopt the recommendations as spelled out in this document.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Has the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Madison seconds. All right. Any further question or discussion on the motion to approve and endorse these?
Eric, I'll just say a word. Again, I appreciate the conversation, and I think it's been healthy dialogue, good questions here. I feel better about this recommendation. I'm still conflicted as to how KSU got here. I don't know if I can, it was mentioned earlier to table it and to bring it up at the special work session next week. But there is a motion and a second on the floor. But at this point, I'm not going to vote for it. Good discussion. A lot of my questions have been answered, but still have some unanswered questions. But anyways, good discussion.
Okay, then let's proceed with the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
1, 2, 3. Those opposed, no. Richard, no. Motion passes 3-1. Thank you all so much again for that. Madison, you had something you wanted to bring up right before we adjourn?
Yeah, I know we're out of time and at the end, but there was a slide that we saw earlier that just kind of brought some things home for me and the important work that this specific committee does. You know, earlier we were looking at the gaps in our workforce and thinking about the funding needs that we need to be asking for to be thinking about how we fill these gaps long term. And it really brought home for me the interconnectedness between what we do and what economic policy is for the state and how one can drive the other. So for example, right now we incentivize new jobs in the state of Kentucky at a wage of only $10.88. To put that into perspective, a single parent raising a kid making that amount of money for a job that your tax dollars helped incentivize, which is probably a manufacturing job or potentially a logistics job, and not to say that there aren't great jobs in those fields, but when we think about those gaps that are there in those two of the highest gap areas that we have, those jobs were incentivized possibly at $10.88, and that single parent has a kid that's on free lunch because they're not at 130% of the poverty level at that wage. This is going to take a holistic approach, and where the rubber meets the road is with the work that we're doing, because we see the impact, the money that we have to request to be able to fill these gaps. And are they efficient or inefficient gaps that are being created at the economic level? I am so excited that we've got Rick Smith on board right now, that the CPE is concentrating on economic and workforce issues, because our ability to bring those two issues together is going to save us money in the long term. And when I saw that slide, I bring that up just to say we need to be thinking about that stuff at the finance committee level. Are they wise investments, or are we investing in poverty? And we've got to make sure that we're not doing that. And so when we try to fill those gaps, I think we need to be very, very careful in the way that we do that. And the state as a whole needs to be very, very careful on what we incentivize and what we do not.
I have to say, I know we're out of time, but Madison, I have to say that I so appreciate that statement. And this committee is about also those strategic conversations as much as it is to look at the numbers. I felt, even though that probably disappoints Bill, me saying that. The item that people have asked me, why did I reorganize CPE and have a workforce piece in higher ed? Well, you just named it well. That's exactly right, because we spending our dollars in a way that creates those economic outputs that we need to have a sustainable economy. I mean, last week, I'll promote a show I did with Richard last week. That was a part of that conversation. I mean, that's exactly why in higher ed, we need to be having this sort of economic way of thinking about the way we're doing our business. Not just saying that it has a direct output, but how do we know, and where are they, and are we efficiently using those dollars in an effective way to make sure that happens? So that is why we have Rick, and that's why I want to build and grow that area even more. Anyway, I know we're out of time, sir, but Madison, I just appreciate you bringing that up.
Just on my heart. Thanks, Aaron.
That is very well said, and I hope you will write that down so we can have that used again if I go. All right. If nothing else, I need a motion to adjourn. And do I have that?
We adjourn.
All right, Richard, seconds.
Second.
Madison, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Good meeting, guys. Thank you.
Bon voyage.
Thank you. I'm going to have a tough afternoon here.
I know.
Wayne, you're just making us mad now. You know that, right?
I know.
Enjoy
Have a
yourself.
good day.
See
Thanks,
ya.
everyone.